B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, August 1st, 2017. Donald Trump, based on the latest anonymous leaks reported in the Washington Post, seems determined to help prove that he has obstructed justice. If the latest leaked story is accurate, and that's an if, could be a really big if, but from what we know of Trump, this one kind of fits the profile. The report is, again, based on anonymous sources, reported to include members of the administration, including top Trump advisors, says that while Trump was flying back from the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany, that he personally got involved in the discussions about how Donald Jr. should respond to questions about that June meeting last year with many Russians, not just the attorney Veselnitskaya. It's a tongue twister for an American like me. Anyway, the report is, and let's be really clear here, based on multiple, though largely anonymous sources that included the president's own advisors, we're told, that Trump dictated the statement that his son Don Jr. first released, and that statement is regarded as highly misleading and far from complete. And as you know, I think that Trump is dirty. I think Trump has made some really ugly deals, including with people from Russia. And I'm still awaiting evidence that the claims that Russia hacked and manipulated our election last year are true. But his firing of the FBI director amid shifting explanations, Trump basically undercut the pretext that his slavish loyal aides, Jeff Sessions and Rod Rosenstein, created for him. And so even if there isn't anything there, Trump seems to be intent on creating the conditions for his removal from office. And so this is, unfortunately, another unproven claim. It shows that despite the 10-day reign of terror of the mob enforcer Anthony Scaramucci, that the White House is still leaking as bad as the, you pick your metaphor. And we're told that there was a struggle and that Trump prevailed. Jared Kushner's team, we don't know if that includes his attorney, Abby Lowell, but they were reported to have decided that it was better to err on the side of transparency because the whole truth would eventually come out. But Trump apparently insisted that he could create his own reality here, and we're seeing that once again come up short. The other breaking story from the Trump White House chaotic swamp relates to Sean Spicer, who has not yet departed the White House as a communications director or press secretary. We're now learning, based on a lawsuit that was filed, that private investigator, Rod Wheeler, he's the one who made some statements that were later retracted after being reported by Fox News, that he had seen evidence that Seth Rich was the person who leaked DNC files to WikiLeaks. As we mentioned, that was retracted. And what we're learning is that Sean Spicer met with Wheeler and a Republican donor named Ed Butowski, and that Spicer also reviewed a draft of the report written by a Fox News reporter who I believe is named Maria Zimmerman. And after the meeting, Spicer was provided a copy of Wheeler's investigative narrative. He asked the two men to keep him abreast of any developments in the case. And Butowski later signaled to Wheeler that the president himself had reviewed the draft report and he wanted it out. So what is fascinating to me, as you know, is that I consider it an open question Did Seth Rich have any role in the leaking of DNC materials to WikiLeaks? And I just consider it one of many possibilities. We'll get to the case of Imran Awan, the Debbie Wasserman Schultz IT guy who's in trouble with the law. He's another suspect. And it bothers me that these obvious domestic cases are dismissed as conspiracy theories when the Russian narrative is a massive conspiracy theory that has little or no public evidence. So let me quote from this passage in today's Washington Post. In a lawsuit first reported by NPR's David Folkenflik, Fox contributor and private investigator Rod Wheeler described his work with Republican donor Ed Butowski to attempt to prove an explosive claim that has since been debunked, that Seth Rich, a DNC IT staffer who was killed in Washington, D.C. last year, had been the source of internal emails later published by WikiLeaks. Now, you just heard in the sentence I read that that explosive claim has since been debunked. I'm not aware of any debunking. The final sentence of this paragraph acknowledges Rich's killing remains unsolved. Later in a passage in the same article, they say that D.C. police believe it was a botched robbery attempt. But they didn't take his wallet or his phone. I believe there was also a watch found on his dead body. So this is contradictory. And does this make me some tinfoil hat conspiracy theory promoter like Alex Jones? Because I have an open mind and I say, well, this could be possible. And the family of Seth Rich keeps begging us to dismiss these painful conspiracy theories. Now, I'm a little tired of that. Because at this point, I would think the Rich family would be open to pursuing any credible lead to solve the unsolved murder of their son Seth. And yet they have PR people who tell us this is a conspiracy theory. It's like dog poop. You just don't want to step in it. Stay away from it. Let the professionals handle it. And over at BuzzFeed, and BuzzFeed is a news outlet that I've been using because my friend Jason Leopold went to work there as part of their investigative team. And I find a lot of problems with BuzzFeed, in particular all of the tabloid celebrity bullshit they publish. But they do have real reporters who cover real stories, and here's their coverage of this one. Lawsuit says Sean Spicer reviewed a Fox News report on a fake conspiracy theory before it was published. Now, how do they know it's fake? It's one thing to tag it as a conspiracy theory. It is. And I'm not one of those people who uses conspiracy theory as some sort of an electrical charge to keep people from exploring it. Because after all, the embraced CIA-fed conspiracy theory is that Russia did this. So, I just keep following this stuff, and I do my best to report to you what I see as valuable, what I see as credible. And this coverage is intended to discourage you from thinking independently, from being skeptical, and from asking questions. And by the way, the Fox News reporter is Malia Zimmerman, not Maria, as I misstated a bit ago. And the Washington Post wrote a second story, a timeline of the explosive lawsuit alleging a White House link in the Seth Rich conspiracy. So I encourage you to join me in the skeptic zone. And let's just watch this stuff. I don't need to take a position on whether Trump actually dictated that memo or not. That's an interesting story, but it's based on anonymous leaks. The Sean Spicer meeting is not based on anonymous leaks. The alleged interference of the president here appears to be coming from named sources. This story is actually more substantive than many of the stories that pass for journalism here in 2017. Now, to the other side of the coin, I usually spend a few minutes listening to Sean Hannity's radio show as I drive home in the evening. And one thing I've noticed is that he really is the cheerleader and the official mouthpiece for the Trump White House. And on last night's program, I thought he was actually reading dictation from the Donald, because he weaves in and out of things about Trump, but most of the focus is on Hillary, Hillary, Hillary. Now, we're 9 months past the election. Hillary lost. And I certainly am open to any honest investigations into what went on with the Clinton campaign, the rigging of the election against Bernie Sanders, the pay-to-play role of the Clinton Foundation, and many of the issues that I've raised over many months. But I don't want to see a witch hunt, and I don't want to see this simply tit for tat, that if there's a special counsel for the Republicans, there has to be one for the Democrats. And with that note, Chuck Grassley, the senator from, where's he from? Iowa. And he is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He wrote a letter to Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein asking, are you investigating the Ukrainian government's intervention in the 2016 presidential election on behalf of the Clinton campaign? If not, why not? Now, this appears to be on a cue from Trump himself, because among many of his wayward tweets last week was one that said, Ukrainian efforts to sabotage Trump campaign, quietly working to boost Clinton. So where is the investigation attorney general? Now, I've talked about this before. There was a campaign staffer working either for Clinton or for a contractor who was digging up information about Paul Manafort's role in Ukraine. And, of course, he worked for Yanukovych, who was deposed with help from the United States, and she contacted his replacement, the Poroshenko administration. And I think it's worthy of investigation. We should know about it. I don't think it was any underhanded effort to manipulate the election, but a contact with a foreign government is inappropriate, perhaps illegal, no matter which party makes that contact. And now to the update on Imran Awan and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Awan and his brother and their wives were all pulling down big salaries, $160,000 about each, as IT consultants to the House of Representatives Democratic Caucus. And as you know, last week, Imran Awan was arrested at Dulles International Airport as he was about to fly to Pakistan. He was charged with one count of bank fraud, but the investigation relates to the work that he did, allegations of double billing, equipment theft, and that he and his colleagues had access to sensitive computer systems, including classified information. We also know he had access to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Democratic National Committee laptop or iPad. And again, I don't have any more information than what I'm about to speculate on. But I believe Imran Awan has to be considered a suspect in the leak of DNC materials, including emails, to WikiLeaks. Again, if we're really open-minded and we want to pursue all possibilities, we can't omit obvious domestic players. And these are just Democrats. Certainly, Republicans and that guy Peter Smith, who died not so mysteriously, but it was by suicide a couple of months ago after he told the Wall Street Journal that he had offered money to buy Hillary's emails from Russian hackers. So we have not conducted a full investigation of these issues. And I believe that a full investigation would determine that Trump illegally or inappropriately was named president after various efforts to manipulate the election, including participation. I just saw a study that in Wisconsin, the voter turnout by African Americans was substantially down, and that is attributed to the requirement for a photo ID to vote. All these matters, these factors just get dismissed because Russia is such a big, juicy target. Well, as you know, we've been covering the election this past Sunday in Venezuela. And today, I caught up with Dan Kovalik. He served as an international election monitor this past weekend in Caracas and nearby areas. And today, on the strength of the election outcome, which is to rewrite the Venezuelan constitution by a constituent assembly, the Maduro government ordered the arrest, and masked gunmen agents came and picked up two opposition leaders, including Leopoldo Lopez, a former mayor of a Caracas area who had been in prison and was transferred to house arrest just last month. It's not clear what the basis is for detaining them. But as I mentioned in the interview to Dan Kovalik, the optics of this are not good. And so I asked him about the Western media reports and the claims from the Trump administration and other governments that this is a power grab by Maduro, who is on track to become a dictator of Venezuela.
That if Maduro's goal was to assume dictatorial powers, he could just do it now. I mean, right, he has control of the military. Invoking a constitutional assembly is a pretty roundabout way and pretty inefficient way to do it, if that was his goal. Let me explain a little what the Constituent Assembly is for folks and what it looks like, and it'll illustrate my point. So the Constituent Assembly is a group which will be able to independently, meaning independently of the Maduro government, redraft the Constitution. By the way, it's already a Chavista Constitution. It was drafted in the early years of the Hugo Chavez government, and so I do find it a little ironic that right-wing folks are crying that the Chavista Constitution may be changed. But in any case, so 545 people ultimately will be elected to do this. I say ultimately because most of the people were elected on Sunday, but the indigenous groups will be able to elect their representatives to the assembly next week. So ultimately there'll be, or I believe, I'm sorry, today actually, there'll be 545 representatives of the people to draft the Constitution. And when I say representative of the people, they're very representative. So who's on there? There's people, and I met some of these people representing the disabled, people representing indigenous, people representing Afro-Venezuelans, people representing workers, students. It's a very grassroots assembly. These are very... this is your salt of the earth who's on this. These are not career politicians.
But aren't they all members of Maduro's ruling party?
No, they are not.
Okay, that's a false statement then that I am reading here from the from the Guardian newspaper. The winners among the 5,500 ruling party candidates running for seats in the Constituent Assembly will have the task of rewriting the Constitution. So that then is a false claim by the Guardian reporter.
Yeah, it's not true. I mean, many people are independent. My friend Jacobo, who I know very well, is a trade unionist. He, for the first time, is running. He ran for a delegate seat. I'm not sure if he won or not. The point being, these are regular people. These are common people who will have a chance to redraft the Constitution. Most of us would think of at least the idea of that as kind of beautiful, right? And by the way, if people don't like that Constitution, and the press isn't talking about this much either, there's going to be a referendum later for people to vote on whether they want that Constitution or not.
You can hear my full interview with Dan Kovalik. A lot of interesting perspectives on Venezuela, very different from what you'll read in the corporate media in the United States. He also suggests some alternative media outlets where you can find better and more complete information about what's going on. A little further south in Brazil, they are on track for the second impeachment of a president in a one-year period. Dilma Rousseff was thrown out of office last year on some pretty flimsy charges of manipulating the budget, replaced by Michel Temer, who was under investigation at the time for corruption. And tomorrow, Wednesday, the lower house of Brazil's Congress will vote on corruption charges against Temer. And if 2/3 of the deputies approve the charges, Temer will be suspended for up to 6 months and put on trial. But if more than a third of lawmakers vote to reject those charges, which is considered likely, Temmer's troubled administration could survive until elections next year. He is accused of, most recently, being a party to a bribe where $150,000 in cash was given to one of his close aides, part of a $12 million bribe deal, as alleged. And it turns out that the protests have subsided. I don't know if there's just fatigue or a sense that, it doesn't do any good. Nobody's listening. Nobody's paying attention. And that's pretty sad. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. People like Janet Price, Joey Perillo, who really lost out because he was getting hair and makeup ready so he could play the part of Anthony Scaramucci. And now he has been denied that quest. Joey's an actor based in the Philadelphia area. There's also Tim McKay, a staunch supporter, and Wendy Gebauer. Thanks to each of you, and I use you as examples for other people because they can follow your example by supporting my work. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. You click on menu, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page, and from there you've got easy options. Hopefully one will fit your budget. Well, I want to mention to you today that I'm experiencing some unusual back pain. And I don't have any OxyContin or even Vicodin to take for it. I'm just using ibuprofen. And it's not very effective. And I mention this because I have great compassion and empathy for people who have chronic pain. I mean, I have it a couple of days a year. But people who live with it day in and day out, it's debilitating and crazy-making. And so the opioid drugs are, in one sense, a miracle. They do take away the pain, but they're highly addictive, and we have a nation now with hundreds of thousands of people addicted to these pharmaceutical drugs. Nobody's holding the pharmaceutical companies or the doctors who overprescribe them responsible. And there's a presidential commission headed by Chris Christie, the big boy governor of New Jersey. And it has offered its first recommendations, calling for Trump to declare a state of emergency and advocating for a variety of measures to increase access to addiction treatment and reduce the supply of illicit fentanyl. But what's interesting is that the commission received some 8,000 public comments. And they talk about the robust contributions of the public, but they don't publish any of the comments. And it turns out that 7,800 of them were from people who advocate the use of marijuana for pain relief and to help wean people from addiction to opioid drugs. So once again, Obama did this. He set up the whitehouse.gov petitions and said, you get to 25,000. Then I think they later raised it to 100,000 signatures. We will respond in some form. And the first wave of posts of petitions during the Obama administration was about legalization of weed. Now, what's interesting is researchers at the University of Georgia found that states that have medical marijuana available show significant declines in painkiller prescriptions. And the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health found that states with medical marijuana had 27% fewer deaths from opioid painkillers. And that's just the smoking of weed, and in some cases, the liquid use of it. But there's this whole area that doesn't involve the THC and the psychoactive elements of the cannabis plant. We refuse to allow research into that to go forward, but the body has these cannabinoid uptake zones, these little areas. And when you feed those uptakes cannabinoid extracts, there are healing powers, pain relief. Marijuana is a very complicated and valuable weed. But we're still stuck in the 1920s, and of course, Jeff Sessions wants to keep it that way. I've been holding on to this one for a while, and I want to connect it to the Opioid Commission. In mid-July, the New York Times reported on mothers who give birth while they are addicted to these painkillers. And they profile a Kentucky woman, 28-year-old Jamie Clay. She was hooked on oxycodone for almost 10 years. They put her into a recovery program. She switched to another opioid that eased her addiction, but it put her baby at risk for withdrawal. And despite the fact that she was considered not addicted at the time she gave birth, they took her baby away from her. Initially, they took it to a special clinic, a neonatal clinic, to wean it off the drugs, and then they gave custody to her parents. Now, what's interesting is she has a toddler, I think a 4 or 5-year-old, which has not been taken away from her, even though it's reported she was addicted for 10 years. So there's very uneven application of the law, and of course I favor keeping the mother and child unit united, except in extreme cases. But this is part of the plague that we are dealing with now. Now, I don't know what kind of health state of emergency Trump might call at the behest of Chris Christie, but there's an interesting piece of speculation at Newsweek this week. They cover an event held by the Brennan Center from NYU, which was taking a look at what the reaction would be if Trump tries to declare a state of emergency or martial law as a way to maintain power. And what's interesting is that Newsweek, this is an unsigned, it's written by Rachel Kleinfeld. She notes that the United States already is being ruled under a state of emergency. It started under Bush, continued under Obama. That, of course, is all of the 9/11 laws, including the Patriot Act. And she notes that there was a 5-year sunset clause initially in the Patriot Act, but 5 years later they removed the clause and made 14 of the 16 elements of the Patriot Act permanent. And so there's no real recipe here or some list of what would happen or what the response should be, but it is an interesting look at the way nations fall asleep under states of emergency and martial law, and it never goes away. Russia is planning to send as many as 100,000 troops to the eastern edge of NATO territory over the next month, a build-up for military maneuvers known as Zapad, which is Russian for West. And the maneuvers are being held in Belarus, the Baltic, Western Russia, and the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. So this is not directly in response to our sanctions and the counter-sanctions from Russia. This buildup has been planned for some time. It's in a response to the NATO war games that we play on a regular basis there. And, of course, our media doesn't bother to mention that we do it all the time. We provoke the Russians, and it's similar to what we're doing with North Korea. And I credit the editorial board of the New York Times for a strong opinion piece today, urging Trump to drop the bluster on North Korea. They open by saying that his approach to the North Korean nuclear threat is failing, and that his efforts to blame China are not going anywhere. And they encourage him to get directly involved, to start negotiations with a top-level envoy, and to see if there is the basis for a diplomatic solution. But, of course, Trump, who won't even staff the State Department and appears to be pissing off Rex Tillerson more every day, they're not interested in diplomacy. They don't want to pick up feelers or, mysterious signals from Kim Jong-un. They like to operate just in the brutal zone. The Pentagon has drawn up plans to supply weapons to Ukraine in its fight against Russian-backed rebels. They're now seeking White House approval for the plan. They say that Trump has yet to be briefed on it, but that the idea is to send anti-tank, possibly anti-aircraft missiles to Ukraine as a deterrent against further Russian aggression. And this, of course, we didn't give anti-aircraft weapons in Syria, but we passed around weapons feeling confident that we could keep them out of enemy hands. And I have the same problem with this idea related to Ukraine. Because if we give them heavier weapons, there's a good chance they will fall into the hands of the Russians. And who's that going to help? Also, interesting piece of speculation over at antiwar.com. We credit the article to Jason Ditz and the tip-off to our friend in the Netherlands, After months of the Pentagon failing to sell a concrete plan of escalation in Afghanistan, officials now say the administration is considering getting back on track with a drawdown headed for a full pullout from the country after 16 years. Now, as you know, we often hear the overused and abused phrase, all options are on the table. Well, when Obama reviewed options for Afghanistan back in 2009 and authorized not one but two surges of American troops, the one option that wasn't on the table was withdrawal. And at this point, it's hard to see if this is a real possibility with the Trump administration. But I like to promote the idea that if all options are on the table, one of them is to get the fuck out of there. Pardon my French. In Alabama, a federal judge has struck down a one-of-a-kind, gross piece of legislation that enables judges to put a minor seeking an abortion through a trial-like proceeding in which the fetus can get a lawyer and the prosecutor can object to the pregnant girl's wishes for an abortion. This is a bizarre process that could only happen in the corrupt state of Alabama, where the posturing, as over-the-top evangelicals is out of control. And these are the same people who have all those affairs that Roger Schuler reports on at the Legal Schnauzer blog. So back in 2014, they changed the state's process, and federal judge Susan Russ Walker on Friday sided with the ACLU, saying the law is unconstitutionally and impermissibly imposes an undue burden on a minor in Alabama who seeks an abortion through a judicial bypass, meaning she doesn't have her parents' approval. And there's a really good op-ed published at The Guardian today by Jamie Peck, noting that Democrats have quietly moved on from their advocacy of abortion rights as a central plank of the Democratic platform. In a recent interview, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee Chair Ben Ray Lujan said there is no litmus test on abortion for candidates as the party scrambles to take back a majority in the House. Now, to her credit, Hillary Clinton did talk occasionally about abortion rights last year, but on The View she said, well, of course, you can be anti-choice and be a feminist. And Tim Kaine was a guy with a real problem record on abortion rights. And even Nancy Pelosi, who is a staunch pro-choice supporter, said, of course, candidates can be anti-choice and receive the support of the party, and that abortion was kind of a fading issue for Democrats. I'm deeply troubled by this. And I was posting in a thread on Facebook the other day where people were commenting on this new branding message, the better deal by the Republicans. By the Democrats. It's not a better deal. If you're of childbearing age and you want to preserve your right to choose an abortion. Finally today, Sheriff Joe has been convicted of contempt. He's been contemptible for a long, long time, but Joe Arpaio, the former sheriff of Maricopa County, that's Phoenix, Arizona, has been convicted of contempt for refusing to stop traffic patrols that targeted minorities. Now, he's 85 years old, and they probably won't send him to the jail that he used to run, but they should, if only for a week, because he should experience the humiliation of the pink underwear that he forced his prisoners to wear. He should experience the extreme heat of the tents that they house prisoners in the broiling summer heat in Phoenix. But that's not going to happen. Thanks for joining me for my daily news and comment podcast. You can find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling